She filed 47 complaints to kill my 200-year-old oak because a single leaf touched her BMW. I warned her the tree was protected. She laughed. So I turned her $1.8 million driveway into a federally protected bat sanctuary, banned parking forever, and watched the U.S. government tow her cars while news helicopters circled overhead. This is the insane true story of how one entitled neighbor declared war on nature. And nature hit back with endangered species, $250,000 fines, and an army of bats that ended her suburban empire. You won't believe how far it went. It all started with a single leaf. One golden, perfectly formed oak leaf that drifted off my 200-year-old heritage tree and landed on the hood of her pristine white BMW M8. Most people would have brushed it off, maybe even smiled at the beauty of autumn. But not Cynthia Harrington of 1427 Willow Crest Lane. To her, that leaf was a declaration of war. The tree had stood in my front yard long before the subdivision was even a sketch on an architect's table. Records showed it was already a towering giant when the neighborhood was nothing but farmland in the 1820s. The city had designated it a protected heritage oak decades ago, complete with a bronze plaque and legal safeguards stronger than most prenups. I'd bought the house 10 years earlier specifically because of that tree. Its massive canopy shaded the entire front of the property, and in summer it turned the lawn into a cool green cathedral. I'd spent thousands installing a drip system just to keep it healthy. It was more than a tree. It was the soul of the house. Cynthia moved in next door 2 years ago, snapping up the newly built 6-bedroom monstrosity that replaced what used to be a quiet, empty lot. From day one, she made it clear that nature was an inconvenience that should be controlled, manicured, or eliminated. Her lawn was astroturf. Her hedges were plastic. Even her seasonal porch decorations were battery-operated and remote-controlled. The first time she saw the oak drop a handful of leaves onto her side of the property line, her face twisted like someone had keyed her car. The complaints began almost immediately. First, it was polite-ish notes left in my mailbox asking me to do something about the leaves. Then came the certified letters from the HOA claiming the tree was a nuisance and violated Section 14B of the covenants. When those were ignored because the HOA had zero jurisdiction over a city-protected tree, she went rogue. She started photographing every single leaf that crossed the invisible line, timestamping them like a deranged forensic scientist. By the end of the first fall, she had submitted 47 separate complaints to the City Code Enforcement Office, each one demanding the immediate removal of my oak because it was devaluing her property and damaging her vehicle. 47. I counted them when the city clerk, half laughing, handed me the stack and told me they were closing the file. The tree was exempt from every ordinance she quoted. The clerk even circled the heritage designation in red marker and wrote, "Do not remove," across the top. Cynthia didn't take that well. She showed up at my door one Saturday morning in full designer athleisure, holding a printout of some obscure state statute she'd found on Google, screaming that she would sue me, the city, and the tree itself if necessary. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about leaves anymore. This was about control. She wanted the neighborhood to look like the inside of a luxury car brochure, and my ancient, untamable oak was the one thing she couldn't buy, bully, or Botox into submission. She escalated. She paid teenagers to rake leaves into my driveway when I wasn't home. She installed a leaf blower on a motion sensor that went off every time a squirrel moved. She even tried to convince the HOA to levy special assessments against me for excessive organic debris. The board shut her down, but not before she circulated a petition that somehow gathered 12 signatures from people who were clearly terrified of her. Winter came, the leaves stopped falling, and I thought maybe she'd move on to a new obsession. I was wrong. In January, she started complaining about acorns denting her BMW's hood, even though the tree was dormant and hadn't dropped an acorn in months. In February, it was twigs. In March, it was excessive bird activity. She filed so many complaints that the city finally sent an arborist out just to shut her up. The arborist spent 3 hours measuring, photographing, and climbing the tree. His report was 20 pages long and basically read like a love letter to my oak. He concluded it was in perfect health and a valuable community asset. Cynthia lost her mind when she saw the report. She stood in the middle of the cul-de-sac screaming at the arborist that he'd been bribed. That night, someone egged my garage door and spray-painted "murderer" across the trunk of the tree in red paint. I never proved it was her, but the security camera caught a white BMW creeping past at 2 a.m. with its lights off. By spring, I was done playing defense. I'd spent months documenting every single one of her stunts, saving every certified letter, every photo, every insane email. I had a folder an inch thick labeled simply "Cynthia versus Reality." The tree wasn't going anywhere, but she clearly wasn't going to stop until one of us was destroyed. What she didn't know was that I'd spent 20 years as an environmental compliance consultant before I retired. I knew more about protected species, wildlife habitats, and bureaucratic red tape than she could learn in 10 lifetimes of Facebook law school. And that oak wasn't just a tree. It was home to something she'd never even noticed, something that was about to turn her pristine driveway into protected federal territory. Little did she know, the war over leaves was about to become a war over bats. For years I had known they were there, but I never needed them until Cynthia turned my front yard into a battlefield. Every summer, just after dusk, hundreds of little shadows would pour out of a long, jagged cavity high in the oak's trunk. They moved like dark liquid against the sky, silent, fast, and beautiful. Little brown bats, Myotis lacifugis, a maternity colony that had probably been using that tree since before the Civil War. I'd watched them with binoculars from my second-story window, seen the mothers returning at dawn with bellies full of mosquitoes, seen the babies clinging to the rough bark while they waited for milk. I never disturbed them. I never even told most of the neighbors. To me, they were quiet tenants who paid their rent in insect control. But once Cynthia declared total war, those bats stopped being just a cool wildlife fact. They became ammunition. I started by confirming what I already suspected. The colony was massive, easily over 400 individuals during peak summer. The cavity they used was a natural hollow formed centuries ago when the tree lost a giant limb. It faced south, stayed warm, and had multiple exit holes. Perfect maternity roost conditions. I set up a thermal camera for 2 weeks and recorded every emergence. The numbers were staggering. On warm nights, the sky looked like someone had spilled black glitter. I sent the footage, along with bark samples and guano analysis, to a bat biologist I'd worked with on federal projects years earlier. Her reply came back in less than 24 hours with 3 words in all caps: federally protectable. See, the northern long-eared bat had just been uplisted to endangered, and while my colony was primarily little browns, the feds were casting a wide net. Any roost that could potentially support endangered species fell under the Endangered Species Act's umbrella. And once a site is documented as critical habitat, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service doesn't mess around. Private property rights take a back seat to a bat the size of a mouse. I filled out the paperwork myself, every form, every map, every photograph. I included the thermal counts, the guano DNA results, and a 20-page report titled Historic Maternity Colony of Myotis Species in 200-Year-Old Quercus stellata, Willow Crest Lane, Fairfax County. I attached the city's own heritage tree designation and the arborist's report that called the tree irreplaceable. Then I mailed the package to the Regional Fish and Wildlife Office with a cover letter that basically said, "Please come save this tree for my neighbor." 3 weeks later, a biologist named Dr. Patel showed up in a government truck. Cynthia watched from her window like a hawk while he spent 6 hours in my tree with a lift and an acoustic monitor. She tried to approach him twice. Both times he politely told her this was official federal business and she needed to stay back. When he finally climbed down, he handed me a temporary protection letter on fish and wildlife letterhead. The oak and a 50-foot radius around it were now considered potential critical habitat pending full review. No disturbance, no trimming, no removal, no pesticides, no bright lights within 100 yards after dusk. Violation carried fines up to $100,000 and possible jail time. I taped the letter to my front door like it was a college acceptance letter. Cynthia's head nearly exploded when she saw it. She stormed over that same afternoon waving her own copy. Someone at the city had apparently tipped her off, and screaming that bats carry rabies and I was putting the entire neighborhood in danger. I just pointed to the federal seal and told her to take it up with Uncle Sam. But the best part? The protection radius included her entire driveway. Dr. Patel had drawn the buffer zone himself, and because the exit hole faced southeast, the primary flight path of the bats cut right across her double-wide stamped concrete driveway and her 3-car garage. Every night, hundreds of bats would leave the roost and funnel directly over her precious BMW, her Range Rover, and her husband's Porsche 911. They weren't going to bite anyone. They weren't even going to land. They were just going to fly. But the feds don't care about convenience when endangered species are involved. Within a week, the official signs went up. Bright yellow diamond-shaped placards on metal posts hammered into the ground at the edge of her driveway. Protected bat habitat, NO parking, NO idling, NO exterior lighting 30 minutes after sunset to 30 minutes before sunrise, violation of federal law. There were 4 of them. 1 at the street, 1 at the garage doors, and 2 more along the sides. You couldn't miss them if you were blind. Cynthia tried to pull them out the first night. My Ring camera caught her in yoga pants and fury, yanking at the posts with both hands until she nearly dislocated her shoulder. They didn't budge. Dr. Patel had set them in concrete. The next morning, a county sheriff's deputy showed up after I reported attempted destruction of federal property. He didn't arrest her, but he did give her a very long, very serious talk about how the feds feel about people messing with their signs. That was the first night she couldn't park in her own driveway. She started parking on the street, but the HOA had strict no overnight street parking rules, and the same neighbors who signed her stupid tree petition suddenly discovered the joy of calling the towing company when her BMW blocked their sightlines. By the end of the first month, she was parking 3 blocks away in the overflow lot by the community pool and walking home in heels. But I wasn't done. Not even close. The temporary protection was only step 1. The real nuclear option was still coming, and it was going to make her driveway untouchable for decades. The temporary protection letter was just the opening act. What I really wanted, what I had been quietly building toward for months, was permanent, ironclad. You will never park here again for the rest of your life status. And in the world of bat conservation, there is one designation that is basically the Death Star of legal protection. Official registration as a priority bat hibernaculum and maternity sanctuary under the North American Bat Conservation Agreement. Once a site gets that label, it's locked down tighter than a military base. We're talking multi-agency oversight, annual federal funding for monitoring, and, most importantly, a permanent 300-foot no disturbance buffer that gets recorded on the county land records in red ink. I knew the oak qualified. The colony had been stable for at least 30 years according to the guano layers. It supported multiple threatened species, and the tree was the only known maternity roost of its size within a 50-mile radius. All I had to do was get the right people to sign off. I flew Dr. Patel and 2 senior biologists from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service out on my own dime. I paid for hotels, meals, the whole thing. For 4 days they lived in my backyard with acoustic recorders, thermal drones, and enough scientific gear to make NASA jealous. They climbed the tree, installed permanent monitoring boxes, and took DNA samples from every bat they could safely catch and release. The final report was 87 pages long and ended with one sentence that made me grin for an entire week. This site represents one of the most significant remaining maternity colonies in the Mid-Atlantic and warrants immediate priority sanctuary designation. 2 months later, the package landed in my mailbox. A thick envelope with the seals of 6 different agencies. Inside was the official declaration. My oak was now the Willow Crest Lane Protected Bat Sanctuary. The buffer zone had been expanded to a full 300 feet in every direction, which swallowed not only Cynthia's driveway but half her front lawn and the entire apron where her garage doors opened. The document was recorded at the county courthouse the same day. From that moment forward, her driveway was legally classified as Critical Foraging Egress Corridor for federally protected wildlife. Then came the signs. Not the little yellow temporaries. These were massive, forest green metal signs with white lettering and the official U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service logo. 8 of them. They went up along her driveway like a military perimeter. Willow Crest Lane Bat Sanctuary, NO parking at any time, NO vehicular access 30 minutes after sunset to 30 minutes before sunrise. Fines up $250,000, and/or 5 years imprisonment. There was even a QR code that linked directly to the federal registry page proving it was real. Cynthia came home from Pilates that afternoon and found a government contractor finishing the last installation. She lost it so completely that the poor guy called his supervisor and refused to come back without a police escort. She tried to run over one of the signs with her Range Rover. The sign won. The bumper did not. That night was the first time the full reality hit her. The bats started emerging at 8:17 p.m., right on schedule. Hundreds of them, streaming out in a dark ribbon that passed less than 15 feet above her garage doors. Because the new permanent lights she had installed violated the sanctuary rules, a fish and wildlife law enforcement officer showed up the next day and issued her a $15,000 citation on the spot. She paid it, turned the lights off, and discovered that without floodlights her driveway was pitch black. She couldn't see to pull in even if she wanted to risk the fines, so she kept parking on the street. But now every single car that parked anywhere within the sanctuary buffer, which now included the cul-de-sac and half the neighboring lawns, was subject to immediate towing by federal order. The towing company the government contracted put stickers on windshields that read, "Removed for violation of endangered species ACT." They towed her BMW twice in 1 week. The impound lot started charging her storage by the day, and because it was a federal seizure, she couldn't fight it in small claims court. Within 30 days, she was parking in the Target parking lot a mile away and Ubering home. Her husband started taking separate cars to work just to avoid coming home to another tow truck. But I still had one more card to play. The sanctuary designation came with annual monitoring requirements, and guess whose property was now the official access corridor for researchers? That's right. Every summer, teams of grad students and federal biologists would need to walk through her yard multiple times a week to reach the tree. The easement was recorded forever. She hadn't even seen the first research team yet, and they were scheduled to arrive in less than a month. Her driveway was dead. Her sanity was next. June arrived like a slow-moving invasion force, and Cynthia had no idea what was coming. The first van rolled up at 6:42 a.m. on a Monday, a white Ford Transit with U.S. Fish and Wildlife plates and a roof rack full of bat nets and acoustic equipment. For graduate students in khaki vests spilled out, followed by Dr. Patel and 2 postdoctoral researchers I'd met during the designation process. They unloaded folding tables, coolers, a portable guano vacuum, and something that looked suspiciously like a small radar dish. All of it had to be carried through Cynthia's front yard, because the recorded easement ran straight across her lawn, between her boxwood hedges, and right up to the base of my oak. I watched from my porch with a cup of coffee as the team leader rang Cynthia's doorbell and handed her an official courtesy notice. Laminated, color-coded, and impossible to ignore. It informed her that from June 1st to September 15th, researchers would access the sanctuary a minimum of 4 nights per week, plus unlimited daytime visits for maintenance and data collection. They were required by law to be courteous but firm, and they had the right to open any gate, move any obstacle, and remain on the property as long as necessary. The notice also reminded her that interfering with authorized federal personnel was a felony. Cynthia opened the door in a silk robe and sunglasses, took one look at the 8 people already marching across her astroturf with pelican cases, and slammed the door so hard the wreath fell off. That was day 1. By the end of the first week, the schedule had solidified. The team arrived every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday at sunset. They set up a mistnet station exactly where her circular driveway met the garage, because that was the primary flyway. They strung harp traps across the space where her cars used to park. They placed infrared cameras on tripods that pointed directly at her front door for calibration purposes. Every piece of equipment was labeled Property of USFWS, Do Not Touch. At night, red headlamps bobbed across her lawn like demonic fireflies. The students played bat calls at full volume to attract emerging mothers, high-pitched chirps that sounded like a horror movie soundtrack. They shouted measurements to each other. Female, lactating, 6.8 grams. Recapture. Band number 1147. The noise went on until 2 or 3 a.m., sometimes later if the emergence was heavy. During the day it was worse. One PhD candidate decided the perfect control site for temperature loggers was the shady spot directly under Cynthia's bedroom window. Another needed to dig guano core samples and chose the exact center of what used to be her prized rose bed. They left neat little orange flags everywhere, hundreds of them, turning her lawn into a miniature minefield of science. Cynthia tried everything. She installed motion-activated sprinklers. The team just put on rain gear and kept working. She parked her Range Rover sideways to block the easement path. The tow company, now on speed dial for the feds, removed it within 30 minutes and billed her $425. She called the county sheriff so many times that the dispatcher started recognizing her voice and transferring her straight to voicemail. One particularly hot July evening, she reached peak meltdown. The team was processing a net full of bats on folding tables literally sitting on her driveway. Cynthia stormed out in a designer kaftan screaming that they were trespassing and she was calling Homeland Security. Dr. Patel calmly handed her a business card that read, Special Agent U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Office of Law Enforcement. Cynthia went pale, retreated inside, and didn't come out for 3 days. By August, her husband had moved into the guest room at his golf club. The BMW and the Porsche were permanently stored in a climate-controlled facility 20 minutes away because there was literally nowhere closer to park them without risking federal impound. Delivery drivers refused to come down the street after dark because the cul-de-sac was clogged with research vans. Even the garbage truck started skipping her house on collection day. The driver told her he wasn't getting fined $250,000 because she couldn't move her bins past the sanctuary boundary. Her front yard now looked like a cross between a crime scene and a music festival. Orange flags, equipment cases, caution tape, and hand-painted signs that read, Active Bat Research, Keep Clear. The AstroTurf was dying in patches where coolers had sat too long. There were bat band numbers sharpened on her driveway in fade-resistant paint for photo calibration. Someone had even taped a laminated poster to her garage door that showed a smiling little brown bat with the caption, Thank you for hosting our maternity colony. The neighborhood WhatsApp group, once her personal propaganda machine, had gone silent except for people posting photos of the chaos with laughing emojis. A few neighbors quietly asked me if they could get sanctuary signs for their own yards just to keep Cynthia's future complaints at bay. And then, on the hottest night of the summer, the research team made a discovery that turned inconvenient into permanent national treasure. They found endangered northern long-eared bats, actual federally listed ones, using the same roost. Just 3 individuals, but 3 was enough. The sanctuary designation got upgraded again. This time to critical habitat, highest priority. The new buffer jumped to 1,000 feet. Half the neighborhood, including the HOA president's house, was now inside the no disturbance zone. Cynthia's driveway wasn't just dead. It had become ground zero for one of the most protected pieces of suburban real estate in the country. The upgrade to critical habitat highest priority hit the Federal Register on a Tuesday morning in late August, and by Tuesday afternoon the entire world knew Cynthia Harrington had lost the war to a tree and a handful of flying mice. It started with a single post on a local bat conservation Facebook group. Someone from the research team uploaded a photo of a northern long-eared bat clinging to the oak's bark, tiny orange band visible on its wing, with the caption, Confirmed NLEB in suburban Virginia maternity roost, one of only 11 known colonies east of the Mississippi. Within hours, the post had 40,000 shares. Wildlife blogs picked it up. Then a producer from a DC news station saw the photos of Cynthia's driveway turned into a research camp and smelled blood in the water. The first news van showed up Wednesday at dawn. Channel 9, the same station that usually covers traffic and school board fights. They parked at the edge of the cul-de-sac, carefully outside the 1,000-foot buffer, and sent a reporter jogging toward the sanctuary signs with a cameraman in tow. By the time Cynthia opened her front door in last night's makeup and a bathrobe, there were already 3 more vans and a drone buzzing overhead. The reporter tried to interview her. She slammed the door so hard the glass pane cracked. That clip went viral before lunch. By Thursday, the story had mutated into pure internet catnip. Karen versus endangered bats. She declared war on a 200-year-old tree, and the federal government declared war on her driveway. Someone stitched together Ring footage of her trying to yank out the sanctuary signs with the audio of bats echolocating. It hit 10 million views in 48 hours. TikTok teenagers started doing skits where they pretended to park imaginary Teslas and then get towed by the feds. A popular Reddit thread titled, "Suburban Woman Accidentally Creates National Wildlife Refuge in Her Own Front Yard," reached the front page and stayed there for a week. National media descended by the weekend. CNN sent a climate correspondent. National Geographic wanted drone footage. A Netflix true crime producer left a voicemail asking if I'd consider optioning the rights. I didn't answer. Someone launched a GoFundMe called "Buy Cynthia a Parking Spot" that raised $87,000 in prank donations before it got shut down. The Fish and Wildlife Service, smelling a public relations goldmine, leaned all the way in. They issued a press release announcing that the Willow Crest Lane colony was now part of a multi-state conservation initiative. They installed a permanent interpretive kiosk at the entrance to the cul-de-sac, a big wooden sign with glossy photos of bats in flight, and a QR code that played a video narrated by a famous actress who does a lot of nature documentaries. The sign had a bench. People started treating it like a tourist attraction. Busloads of school kids showed up on field trips. Birders came at dusk with lawn chairs and thermos coffee to watch the emergence. A local brewery released a limited batch IPA called Bat Sanctuary Blonde with my oak tree on the label. They sent me a case. Someone started selling t-shirts that read, "I got towed by the Endangered Species Act," with a cartoon BMW getting lifted by a giant bat. Cynthia stopped leaving her house. Delivery drivers left packages on the sidewalk because they weren't allowed past the signs. Her Ring camera notifications became a 24/7 horror movie. Strangers taking selfies with her garage door in the background, kids pressing their faces against her windows to see if the crazy bat lady was home, teenagers filming dance videos on what used to be her driveway. The HOA tried to hold an emergency meeting to address the situation. Only 7 people showed up, and 5 of them wanted to know how to get their own yards declared bat sanctuaries. The president resigned on the spot. Then came the final blow. In September, the Department of the Interior announced that the Willow Crest Lane Protected Bat Sanctuary had been selected for a federal conservation easement in perpetuity. Translation: the land under the oak and the entire 1,000-foot buffer, including most of Cynthia's lot, was now encumbered forever. No future owner could ever build, pave, or disturb it without an act of Congress. The title report for her $1.8 million house now contained 17 pages of restrictions written in bold red letters. Her property value didn't just drop. It entered a parallel dimension where real estate agents simply refused to list it. Zillow marked it off-market, unique conservation status. When she tried to get a refinance, 3 separate banks laughed her off the phone. She put it up for sale anyway. The listing photos were tragic. Orange flags everywhere. Research equipment in the background. A giant green federal sign blocking half the driveway. The asking price was 60% below what she paid. It sat for 112 days with 0 offers. By November, the bats had gone into hibernation. The students had packed up their nets, and the news trucks had moved on to the next outrage. The street went quiet again, except for the soft rustle of leaves from my untouchable oak. Cynthia's house stayed dark. Her cars stayed in storage. Her husband's Porsche was spotted at a long-term airport lot. Rumor was he'd taken a job in Singapore just to get away. And one cold December morning, a single moving truck pulled up to 1427 Willow Crest Lane. No for sale sign ever came down because it never sold. She just walked away. The bank foreclosed in February. The note on the courthouse steps read, "Property subject to federal conservation easement. Sold as is. Extreme restrictions." The winning bid was $412,000. The new owner? A bat conservation nonprofit funded partially by that prank GoFundMe money that got redirected. They turned her mansion into researcher housing and education offices. Her driveway? Still empty. Still protected. Still waiting for the first warm night when hundreds of tiny mothers will rise out of my oak again and fly right over the spot where her BMW used to sit. Some wars end with a bang. This one ended with wings. The foreclosure of 1427 Willow Crest Lane didn't just mark the end of Cynthia's reign. It reshaped the entire neighborhood in ways nobody could have predicted. By spring, the bat conservation nonprofit that snapped up her mansion for a fraction of its worth had transformed the 6-bedroom monument to excess into something the cul-de-sac had never seen. A living, breathing hub of science and community. The house, once a sterile showcase of Cynthia's control-freak aesthetic, was now a chaotic, joyful mess of research equipment, potted native plants, and hand-painted bat murals on the garage doors. The nonprofit named it the Willow Crest Bat Education Center, and it became the kind of place where kids ran through the halls and PhD candidates argued over coffee at 3 a.m. The transformation started almost immediately after the nonprofit took possession. They ripped out the astroturf and replaced it with a pollinator meadow full of milkweed and coneflowers. The plastic hedges were hauled to the dump, and in their place went blackberry bushes and elderberry shrubs, chosen specifically to attract insects for the bats to eat. The driveway, still legally untouchable, was left bare except for a single addition. A low wooden platform where researchers could set up portable mist nets without disturbing the ground. The massive green federal sign stayed, but someone added a smaller one that read "Welcome to your local bat sanctuary, tours available," with a phone number and a smiley face. The nonprofit didn't just change the house. They changed the rhythm of the neighborhood. Every Friday night, they hosted free Bat Watch events where families could sit on blankets at the edge of the cul-de-sac and watch the colony emerge from my oak. They passed out hot cocoa and handed kids little bat detectors that turned echolocation pings into audible clicks. The turnout was unreal. 50 people on a slow night, 200 when the weather was perfect. Local schools started booking tours, and the center's tiny staff of 3 full-time biologists became minor celebrities. One of them, a grad student named Maya, even started a YouTube channel where she live-streamed the bat emergences and answered questions about why bats aren't actually blind and don't actually suck blood. Her subscriber count hit 300,000 in 6 months. The neighborhood itself started to shift. The HOA, gutted by the resignations and humiliated by the sanctuary's dominance, quietly rewrote its covenants to encourage native landscaping and wildlife-friendly practices. 2 neighbors on the other side of the cul-de-sac applied for their own mini-sanctuary designations, hoping to piggyback on the oak's fame. One of them, a retired teacher who'd once signed Cynthia's anti-tree petition out of fear, now had a bat box on her fence and a yard full of wildflowers. She told me over coffee that she'd never realized how much she loved watching the bats until they became her bats too. The oak, of course, stood unchanged at the center of it all. Its branches still spread over my yard like a giant's umbrella. Its roots still cracked the sidewalk in the same familiar places. The city sent a new arborist to check on it, and she estimated it could live another 100 years if the climate didn't get too crazy. The nonprofit paid for a lightning rod to protect it from storms and installed a discreet irrigation system to keep the soil moist during droughts. They even named their annual fundraiser after it. The Oak and Wings Gala, held in a tent at the edge of the sanctuary buffer with fairy lights strung through the trees. Not everyone was thrilled. A few holdouts grumbled about the extra traffic or the occasional school bus that blocked the street. But they didn't dare complain too loudly. The memory of Cynthia's downfall was still fresh, and nobody wanted to be the next viral villain. Besides, the nonprofit had a knack for winning people over. They gave free bat boxes to anyone who asked and hosted workshops on how to plant for pollinators. They even started a junior ranger program where kids could earn badges for spotting different bat species. The cul-de-sac went from a place where people barely waved to a place where strangers swapped stories about the time they saw a bat snatch a moth mid-flight. Cynthia's name faded from conversation, but her legacy lingered in the strangest ways. The brewery that made Bat Sanctuary blonde released a new stout called Cynthia's Revenge, with a label that showed a cartoon BMW being carried off by a swarm of bats. It sold out in 3 days. Someone found her old petition online and turned it into a meme template. 47 complaints about a tree, 0 complaints about my own life choices. A local artist painted a mural on the community center wall showing a giant oak with bats flying out and a tiny, angry figure in yoga pants shaking her fist below. Nobody admitted to commissioning it, but everyone knew who it was. As for Cynthia herself, she vanished completely. The last anyone heard, she'd rented a condo in a high-rise 30 miles away. the kind of place with a doorman and no trees within 100 yards. Her husband never came back from Singapore. Their cars were auctioned off to pay the foreclosure shortfall. I found her LinkedIn profile once. She'd listed her job as independent real estate consultant, with no mention of Willow Crest Lane. I didn't dig further. She'd lost everything that mattered to her, and I didn't need to twist the knife. My own life settled into a new kind of normal. I still drank my coffee on the porch every morning, watching the oak's leaves turn gold again as fall approached. The nonprofit offered to buy my house at market value so they could expand the sanctuary, but I turned them down. The tree and I had been through too much together. Instead, I signed a voluntary conservation agreement that let them monitor the colony on my property forever. They named a new bat band series after me. The Oak Keeper bands, bright blue and impossible to miss in the thermal footage. One evening in late September, I sat on my porch during a bat watch event and watched a little girl, maybe 6 years old, point at the sky and scream, "There they go!" as the first bats spilled out of the cavity. Her dad lifted her onto his shoulders, and the crowd cheered like they'd just seen a fireworks show. Maya, the YouTuber, was live streaming it all, narrating in her calm, excited way about how each bat could eat 1,000 mosquitoes in a single night. I looked at the oak, at the bats, at the people who'd come to love them, and realized something. Cynthia hadn't just lost. She'd accidentally created something bigger than herself, something that would outlive us all. The war was over. The oak had won. The bats had won. And Willow Crest Lane, once just another suburban street, was now a place where people came to see miracles the size of a walnut fly out into the dusk.